Ultra Vortek is a Mortal Kombat ripoff, released on the Atari Jaguar by Beyond Games, and was released in September of 1995, about 5 months after Mortal Kombat 3 hit arcades. And by comparison to that game, Ultra Vortek looks pretty weak with its tiny cast of 7 characters and limited story elements. But these games always live and die by their gameplay, and Ultra Vortek could be a surprisingly deep and rewarding fighting game, especially on a system that has many, many poor fighters. So is Ultra Vortek worth picking up for your Jaguar collection, or should you pass it up and just give up on the idea of having a fun fighting game on the Atari Jaguar? Well, let me tell you about it. I know. A lot of people have never heard of Ultra Vortek, and those that have mostly call it bad or forgettable. But there's just something about this mid-90s fighting game that has always drawn me in from the moment I first learned of its existence, more so than even Kasumi Ninja, which seems to be the Atari fighting game that most people think about. But just like in previous reviews, despite the fact that I'm drawn to this one for some reason, I'm going to remain unbiased and do my best to recommend it or not on its own merits. Let's start with the story, which is honestly pretty sparse, and must mostly be read about in the game's manual. It has something to do about an artifact that offers power during a time of testing, where a Guardian must be defeated. Once you do, you earn its power. If nobody can defeat the Guardian and claim its power, then it becomes a cycle that repeats until someone can claim it, or something like that. There's more to it, but it's not very important to anything, even in understanding the text endings that are, well, mostly underwhelming. You have a variety of fighters to choose from. Some are human, some are robots, and there are a few elemental shape-shifting type monsters. All are a part of a society that is attempting to claim the Guardian's power and make themselves the ruling body of the planet. The fighters include Skullcrusher, which is a skinny-looking skeletal robot, Mercury, which is a metallic transforming pile of, mercury, I guess? You have Buzzsaw, which looks like a Mortal Kombat 3 cyborg ninja thing, Dreadlock, which is a Rastafarian, Lucius, who is a lightning-wielding martial artist, Volcana, the lone female of the roster who can control fire, and Grok, who is a stone golem. There is also the boss character, whom is essentially a demon of sorts, and is just as much of a pain in the butt to fight as you can imagine. Well, until you learn his one major flaw, that is. Honestly, the roster is disappointingly small, and really could have used a handful more of combatants. Most of them feel like copies of fighters from more successful franchises. As I said, Buzzsaw is like an MK robot, Lucius is sort of a combination of Raiden and Liu Kang, Mercury reminds me of something from Killer Instinct, Glacius, and come to think of it, even Skullcrusher feels like a character from that series. Dreadlock comes off as a more insensitive DJ and so forth. Still, I do like a few of the fighters, such as Volcana, Grok, and despite his lack of originality, I kinda like Buzzsaw too. So the characters are a bit disappointing, but I think most people will find one to like regardless. I watched somebody's recent video on Ultra Vortek, and I was surprised to hear them say that the stage designs were pretty generic and bad. Now, I'm no fighting game expert, I'm just an Atari nerd, but I really like these levels. I don't know, but I felt like the 10 levels were all varied, and each had their own charms, and I really liked how many there actually is. Now, there isn't really character-specific levels, at least not that I could tell, and the colors do seem to skew towards the browns, grays, and dull sort of greens, with a few exceptions. But this is a game set in a sort of apocalyptic world. Well, I think it's supposed to be an apocalyptic world, so the color choices make sense to me. I do feel there is too much stuff over the life bars that make them needlessly hard to read at a glance. But again, that could be a me issue. There also is no time limit by default, and instead you have this weird eyeball that watches the fighters as they battle, where a timer should be. And I don't know, I don't mind that. The battles are brisk and don't overstay their welcome, even without the timer. But speaking of the battles, let's get into gameplay. The computer can be set to one of 4 difficulty levels: Training, Normal, Hard, and Killer, and each difficulty feels pretty well balanced. In Training, you basically beat on your opponents with them having little chance to win. And in Killer, it's the complete opposite, as your opponents wield their moves with deadly accuracy. Normal and eventually Hard seem to be more at my speed, and I was glad that I could ramp up the challenge as I learned the moves and improved. And the moves aren't crazy difficult to learn, for the most part. There are some that require certain placements of your characters, or buttons to be held down, and I found those too hard to pull off. But most of the moves feel pretty good. A lot of them can be pulled off with a forward A or down forward B, button combinations like that, which I like. Some of them look pretty cool too. I like Lucius's low kick lightning attack that sends a bolt of lightning across the floor, and his ability to turn into a hawk and fly into your opponents is pretty cool too. I also like Volcana's moves, and I enjoyed Croc's moveset, although he desperately needed a projectile. They seem to have attempted some kind of different moves with Mercury, giving him a moveset that's more defensive I think, but they mostly come off as useless. Still, for the most part, I find the combat to be intuitive, and the special moves to be pretty easy to learn and pull off with some consistency. Dare I say that I like the way this fighting game plays? Of course, with any Mortal Kombat clone, there is fatalities known as Annihilation Time, which, let's be honest, that name sounds pretty lame. Each character seems to have 2 or 3 annihilations, and they are mostly easy to pull off, but the positioning is a bit finicky. Even with the move list, I had a hard time pulling these off. There's also some things called poopalities, where you turn your opponent into a literal turd. But hey, the mid-90s was all about violent video games and gross-out humor, right? It was a different time. Some of the fatalities are pretty cool. Most are boring by today's standards, I guess, but I do appreciate the number of stage fatalities. Or, annihilations. Stage annihilations. It's legally distinctive, so I guess I better call it that. Anyway, I do appreciate the number of stage annihilations that you can pull off just by uppercutting your opponent. They seem to work on roughly half the stages, even ones you don't expect them to, which is nice. The CPU doesn't seem to pull off finishers on the lower difficulty settings, so unless you know them, you usually won't see them pulled off.
Annihilation time. Awesome.
In Ultra Vortek, you have to fight each computer-controlled opponent once within the story mode, but you also have these weird shadow levels that definitely feel like a way to extend the game without having to create more characters, which is another weird element of this game. You see, after you fight the cast of fighters, you then have 3 levels in this blue alleyway place, where you fight shadows of the existing cast. These shadows have all the characters' original moves and animations, but you get no break between rounds and have to fight 2 different full-life fighters on 1 life bar. Except on the killer difficulty, where you have to fight 2 fighters on 1 life bar twice, which all I have to say about that is no thank you. Then you have the shadow thing again with 2 more opponents, and then a third time where you have to fight every character, but they have a sliver of life and can be killed in 1 hit, making it laughably easy. After that, you finally get to fight the Guardian, and this guy is going to kick your butt a few times, unless you know the terrible secret that he's hiding. You see, the Guardian is this large claymation demon thing that is pretty big and imposing. He has the tail of a serpent, wings, and breathes fire, and resorts to things like tripping you repeatedly, and hitting you with fireball after fireball until you die. It can be awful to go against him the first few times, but if you pay close attention, you'll realize that the Guardian never jumps, and has no attacks in the air. Once you realize that, well, then this Guardian becomes a bad joke. Use your best air attacks or fly kick him to take him out easily. You're then greeted with an ending text scroll that tells you the fate of each fighter and the faction that they represent. And it's really all forgettable. I don't recommend playing to see all the endings. I really felt it wasn't worth it. But what is worth messing around with, at least once, is the cheats in Ultra Vortek. You can use the number pad at different times in the game to unlock things like a cheat menu, which has some cool hidden options. You can make your opponents die in 1 hit to help you see all of those glorious endings I talked about. You can make yourself die in 1 hit if you hate having fun. And you can even extend the time you're allowed to pull off annihilations, which is awesome for practicing. You can also hold 1, 5, and 9 on the number pad at the title screen to unlock Turbo mode. And honestly, this game plays pretty good in Turbo. I wish they would have made that a standard option. My only complaint is the Guardian is once again close to impossible in Turbo mode, as he is just too fast and relentless to compete against. But maybe that's why it was locked away. You can also unlock the Guardian stage and the Shadow Alley in 2-player by hitting pound or star at the level select, which is a cool secret and is really easy to pull off. You can also unlock the Guardian to play as in the character select screen, which puts his cheapness on full display. He essentially has just 3 moves for the 3 buttons, but they are very powerful. It can be fun to mess around with him, but just for a short period of time. You can also unlock Carbon with a cheat code, but don't get too excited as it's just Grok but a bit darker. And you can play as the Shadow Swaps. Yay. But it's all nice to have and makes Ultra Vortek a cool package to mess with, especially when you factor in that the combat is pretty solid. So with all that said, what score should we give Ultra Vortek? Well, let's do the pros and cons thing to decide, shall we? For the pros, I think the gameplay is pretty solid, if a bit unbalanced. Most of the special moves aren't difficult to pull off, and there are cool stage finishers that can be pulled off pretty easily if you don't want to learn the actual Annihilations. I personally like the level design, and I think there are plenty of stages to pick from. And even if the characters feel borrowed or uninspired, I think you'll find one to like. The cheats and bonuses are nice touches too, and be sure to try the turbo code. And finally, this game really shines in 2-player, but even in 1-player, I must admit, I had fun. Oh, and the difficulties are well balanced, and should make sure that any player of any skill can have fun. For the cons, I really think the boss is cheap at first, but then he gets way too easy once you learn his weakness. The levels mostly stick with dull browns, grays, and greens that won't appeal to some people. Some people will also recognize that these characters feel mostly borrowed from better franchises, and this keeps the game from feeling like it has its own unique identity. The endings are boring to watch and really just not worth seeing, and I wish there was more fighters instead of the shadow battles. Also, the game has poopalities, which no game should have ever had. So, with all that said, I can't help but to feel that Ultra Vortek is a decent little fighting game that might be more fun for fans of the genre than they expect. But it definitely won't be for everybody, so after some deliberation, I've decided to give Ultra Vortek for the Atari Jaguar 3 Jag controllers out of 5. It's good, guys. It's good if you like the genre and want something like it on the console. But if you're not a fighting game fan, well, first of all, you probably wouldn't play this to begin with, but secondly, this won't sway your opinion. Not at all. And it's nowhere near as good as the top fighters of the time, such as Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter. But it is a good game on the Jag. Don't ignore it if you have the opportunity to give Ultra Vortek a try. You might just end up having a good time. So with all that said, I'm the 7800 Pro System Gamer, secret boss character here at the Atari Network, and I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to listen to me review some Jaguar stuff. I hope you join me next time, and until then, don't forget to stay classy, Atarians.